He sparked massive protests when he eliminated collective bargaining rights for most public workers in his state. But after months of political turmoil, the Republican U.S. governor of Wisconsin claimed a decisive victory in a recall election. We'll look at the national consequences of the result. You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. It was one election in one state, but Scott Walker's clear win in a recall vote is being framed by Republicans as a major victory for the party leading up to the November presidential elections and a major defeat for Democrats and labor unions across the country. The political turmoil began more than a year ago when the state's Republican-controlled legislature voted to curb the rights of union members. Hundreds of thousands began protesting against the laws occupying the state's capital for months. Wisconsin became a symbol of the battle workers were facing against a Republican Party determined to slash the power of the unions. Walker's opponents collected more than 1 million signatures to trigger a recall election. Over the next few months, a bitter campaign was launched with tens of millions of dollars spent, most of it from Walker and his supporters, making it the most expensive election in the state's history. The money spent has paid off, despite the massive on-the-ground operation mounted by progressives in Wisconsin. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney was quick to seize on Walker's win, tweeting, "Tonight's results will echo beyond the borders of Wisconsin." So, what are the repercussions of the Wisconsin recall and what impact will it have on the presidential race? Joining us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is Robert Kraig, Executive Director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin, a coalition of social and economic justice groups. With me here, Alex Seitz-Wald, political staff writer at Salon.com, and Brendan Steinhauser, Federal and State Campaigns Director at FreedomWorks, which is associated with the Tea Party movement. Robert Kraig, first of all, we've now had several hours of analysis and punditry following this result. What do you make of the sort of conclusions being drawn?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of disappointment here about the result, obviously. There was a lot of money spent. Governor Walker is an extremely charismatic politician. And another thing is, it's a very short timeline for this election. There was a month to get our side organized. We had a candidate who was a good Democratic candidate, but wasn't really a good fit for the movement that created the recall in the first place. And so with the unprecedented out-of-state money, the saturation on that, and the limitations, it was very tough to do. And the problem is, even though we got the vote out, we got 73% turnout in Milwaukee, which is an amazing amount. The Republican vote around the state exceeded that. And so their side also did a tremendous job of getting the vote out. And so we had a result not dissimilar to Walker's first election in 2010.
Alex Seitz-Wald, I mean, that would suggest then those of us who are trying to square the result with the sort of scenes we saw last year at the Wisconsin Capitol, hundreds of thousands of people, protesters in Tahrir Square in Egypt expressing their solidarity, with the protests and so forth. I mean, it didn't necessarily, that support was still there, but what is your analysis then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things stacked against the Democrats in this race. First of all, there's just a long period of time that passes and excitement dissipates, organization dissipates. You had the tremendous fundraising advantage, 7-1, 10-1 if you look at just the campaign spending from the Republicans to the Democrats.
Actually, we can go through some of those figures. According to the Center for Public Integrity, the Republican Governor Scott Walker outspent his Democratic rival Tom Barrett by a factor of over 7-1. Let's take a closer look at those numbers. $63.5 million was spent by candidates and independent groups, the most expensive election in Wisconsin history. $45 million, two-thirds of the total amount, was spent by Walker's campaign or his supporters. Barrett's campaign and supporters spent $18.5 million. Walker's campaign itself raised $30.5 million. 66% of that came from donors who live outside Wisconsin. Tom Barrett raised $3.9 million. 26% of that came from out-of-state donors. I mean, do you think that was a decisive factor, Alex Seitz-Wald, then?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Robert mentioned, you had a very short time for the Democrats to organize, whereas Scott Walker had been aware that this would be coming for 6 months, 8 months. Into last year, he was preparing for this and raising money, while Democrats and labor unions, who were the big forces against Scott Walker early on, were split between two candidates in the primary. and they wasted a lot of resources and time and energy fighting each other before just May 8th, less than a month ago, when the nominee was decided and they could come together to go against Scott Walker. Of course, the governor also has the huge benefit of being the incumbent and all the things that come with it. And there's a strange quirk in Wisconsin's election law, just to go back to the funding, that allows him to raise unlimited funds while Barrett, the Democrat, could raise only $10,000 from individuals.
Brendan Steinhauser, and that's something we've been hearing quite a lot of then. This was a battle between big money and a grassroots traditional operation, and big money won, and that's quite chilling for the future of US politics as a whole.
Well, I have a bit of a different take on this. You know, I just got back from Indiana a few weeks ago, where the Tea Party movement and Freedom Works took on big money, a big money Republican, Dick Lugar, a longtime incumbent, and we used grassroots work, and we were outspent 3-1, 4-1 there, and we won. And we're doing the same in Republican primaries around the country. So the Tea Party has a pretty good record of challenging and beating Republicans, and maybe we're better at it now than the unions are. But our motto is, once we beat the Republicans in 2012, we're going to go beat the Democrats in November.
It is striking, though, Robert Kraig. I mean, we talk a lot about the money, but it was rather transparent in what Scott Walker stood for. I mean, we knew what his policies were. We have a selection of them here. I mean, some of the measures that he did implement while he was in office. Last year, the Wisconsin governor pushed through legislation that sharply, of course, limited the ability of public unions to bargain on behalf of workers. He said this would help bring down the budget deficit of $3.6 billion, he said. He slashed spending on public schools by $800 to $900 million. He reduced aid to local government by $96 million. He also cut taxes for corporations. That's estimated to take away $2.3 billion in revenue over a 10-year period. Robert Kraig, I mean, there's no secret about this. And it would appear that the voters of Wisconsin didn't have a problem with that.
Well, I mean, that's the result yesterday, obviously. It's partly because of the campaign spending. It's partly that Walker is a very effective candidate and politician. But the truth is, our problem was this. People were amazed a year, 16 months ago, that you could have a mass movement around collective bargaining, because progressives have done a very bad job of explaining it to the public. But it did not get you in an election, even though it was the cause of the recall, the first cause anyway, to over 50%. And so you had to do other issues. And I think a real problem is that the Democratic candidate, partly because of the time frame, didn't offer an alternative agenda. Basically, the position was, we're just not Walker. Walker, with the money behind him, saturating the airwaves, did a very effective job of seeming like he was working on key problems and saying over and over again it was working, even though the job numbers for Wisconsin are among the worst in the country, even with those giant tax cuts he's given away to the wealthy and large corporations. But clearly, in a spring election, it worked for him very well and for conservatives in Wisconsin.
But you don't accept then that the unions lost this argument, that people in Wisconsin apparently don't believe in collective bargaining. They don't think it's right to stand up against businesses who clearly want to pay them as little as possible, some might argue, and fight against these corporations. They'd rather stand with big corporations and the Koch brothers and these out-of-state backers and billionaires and so forth.
Well, the exit polls actually showed that most people supported collective bargaining, and specifically had a positive image of public employee unions in the low 50%. So it was interesting that people were able to hold both positions, just as people also would have elected Obama last night, according to the exit polls. So it doesn't work out in the clear ideological way we're talking about, but we do need to build more support for collective bargaining, because this is going to be a national fight, and public employee unions are going to be the target now in other states because of the conservative momentum coming out of Walker's victory last night. I think there's no question of that.
Alex Seitz-Wald, I mean, that was very striking. 36% of those who voted in favor of Scott Walker were union members. What happened to the reputation of unions? Why is collective bargaining perhaps getting a bad name? Have people really been convinced that the Scott Walker's model of trickle-down economics is the key for Wisconsin and the country?
Yeah, well, two things on that. I think, one, there was a lot of people who were just against the entire recall process. They thought it was too extreme for something, just a policy that they disagree with. And I can understand that. This is a very rare thing. He would have been the third governor in American history to have been recalled. He's the first governor in American history to survive a recall. So, this is usually reserved for governors who break the law or something like that. So there was, according to one exit poll, like 18% of people who were voting based on that notion. Secondly, on the perception of public sector unions, I think, somebody mentioned this to me last night. you might not know a CEO that's paid 400 times what you make, but you might know a DMV employee who lives next door to you, or a retiree who's living on a fairly cushy pension package, and every bad experience you've had at the DMV comes back to you. So it's right there in your face. It's your tax dollars while the rest of the economy is hurting, and they're definitely going to need to make a better message about why Americans should support collective bargaining.
I think it's important to state here, though, that we simply can't afford this anymore. The pensions that the public sector unions have gotten, the amount that they're putting into their health care is not what the private sector has to do. And I think,
but shouldn't that be more of an argument for helping all workers, whether in private or public sector, to have a living wage and a pension?
Well, that's up to the market to decide. But I think that what we're seeing is that the taxpayers are kind of the forgotten man here, because they're having to pay for the lavish pensions. And I would argue the union workers are even better off without some of these contracts, because now they have more money in their pockets. They don't have the forced dues. I mean, if the Tea Party or the Freedom Works organization or other groups had to force their members to give them money, we wouldn't succeed. So this whole model that the unions have is immoral, corrupt, and doesn't work.
I suppose what some are amazed at, and frankly admire, perhaps even on the left, is how Freedom Works and Americans for Prosperity, clearly funded by corporate backers, the Koch brothers and so forth, are managing to get poor people to vote for rising taxes for poor people, lowering taxes for corporations. 2/3 of corporations in Wisconsin don't pay any state taxes at all. It's this amazing. It is a marvel at how apparently you're getting the poor to vote against their own interests.
Well, I don't accept that premise on a number of things. First of all, we have 40,000 donors. We have 1.7 million members across the country. Most of our members are giving us $50 or $100 to support what we do. We don't force it on them. They give it to us freely. They believe in the cause. And we're providing good customer service. We're helping teach them how to be more effective. And the policies that we support would help everyone. We support a flat income tax. We support lowering taxes for everybody, providing the poor with an option or to not pay taxes, federal income taxes. So I think that for us, we're trying to make the economy better. We're trying to make it better for all workers. And regardless of how you feel about the unions, we just simply can't afford the pensions and the health care that the taxpayers have to pay for.
Robert Kraig, clearly this is a key point. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, the only way Governor Walker passed this in the first place with Democrats out of the state was by making a non-fiscal issue. You have to see there's a distinction between health care and pension givebacks and whether you have a right to form a union, and they've conflated those with Walker because his interest is in undermining that power, because it's something that's a check on conservative power in the state, so it's removing your enemies. But I think if you look at this, really, there's a divide and conquer, that's what Walker called it, kind of strategy, a scapegoating public employees as if they're the problem in our society, as if they're the people who are making most of the money in our economy, which is decidedly not the case. And to say just because they've held on to decent health care and pensions, which private sector union workers have lost, which they shouldn't have lost, that we can blame them for our problems. And I think if you look at it economically, if you look at the actual numbers, it's a false argument. In fact, public workers in Wisconsin make less than private sector workers if you adjust for education level, and that includes their pension benefits and health care. So this is kind of scapegoating and divide and conquer, but it's very effective with a lot of voters, and there's a lot of money behind it, of course, as well,
Alex,
that makes it effective.
I mean, when you do look at the figures, there is a pretty clear correlation between the decline in union membership and the rise in income inequality, and yet that seems to be a message that the unions are unable to get across or capitalize upon. I mean, there is this backlash. Is it simply really because of a bad experience while waiting for your driver's license?
Well, I mean, maybe that's overly simplifying it. But yeah, this is. I mean, there's plenty of data on the union side, on labor's side, to suggest that they are good for building the middle class, good for making it better for workers of all stripes, not just unionized workers. And in terms of that we have the weekend and the normal work hours. We have labor unions to thank for a lot of that stuff. On the other hand, they've had a difficulty communicating it, and I think a lot of that has to do with the problems internally. I would hesitate to get too much into mismanagement issues within labor unions, but they've been focused on things and I think have taken the ball off of selling their message to the American people more broadly.
All right, well, let's see what Scott Walker had to say after he won this election. He stuck to his ideological position, even though, as he talked about, unity moving forward.
Early in 2011, I rushed in to try and fix things before I talked about them. Because you see, for years, Too many politicians I'd seen, not only in Madison, but in Washington and beyond, talked about things but never fixed them. Well, but I want to tell you, looking ahead, we know it's important to do both. Looking ahead to tackle the challenges that face all of the people of Wisconsin, we're both going to be committed to talking together about how to solve problems, and then working together, we're going to move forward with the solutions that put our state back on the right track towards more freedom and more prosperity for all of our people.
Brendan Steinhauser, I think Robert Kraig has already alluded to some of these issues, but there are those who oppose Scott Walker who say, look, this wasn't really about fiscal discipline and Wisconsin's own budgetary problems and how they relate to collective bargaining. It wasn't even about whether the recall process is actually, is a tool that should be used in the democratic process as it was in this case. It was simply about destroying a major backer of the Democrats in Wisconsin, as indeed Scott Walker himself was caught saying to one of his backers, once and for all, to make Wisconsin a red state once and for all. It's always been a very divided state.
Well, maybe he's killing two birds with one stone. He's dealing with a corrupt system where unions basically extract and extort money from their membership to buy off politicians in the Democratic Party who then vote for lavish pension programs. I mean, this is a very corrupt system, so maybe he's trying to do that. It also does help Republicans to take away mandatory union dues, take away mandatory union dues. If you pass right to work, like they did in Indiana, there's certain things you can do that definitely lower the power of the unions, but the effect of all of that certainly is economic and certainly is in terms of the size and scope of government going to lower it. I think he's given a lot more flexibility to these local governments, and there's all this doom and gloom that was preached about what was going to happen in Wisconsin, in the economy, and for school teachers and things like that. It never happened, and I think the voters did reject the recall.
All the statistics that are introduced there are always hugely argued over there. I mean, whether it is the budget shortfalls or the number of jobs being created and everything else. Actually, Alex, perhaps you can tell us, but do we have an accurate idea? I mean, whenever someone would say, okay, Wisconsin has actually led the country in job losses, then we'll immediately get someone from the Walker campaign saying, no, that's not true, or that the budget surplus won't be achieved by Walker's policies. Then, of course, that's rebutted. I mean, do we have any hard and fast figures? I mean,
statistics always get politicized. You see it every day with job numbers and unemployment figures. It's hard to say in Wisconsin, and I might defer to Robert on that since he's on the ground there. But certainly, I mean, and like the job figures have been a big issue in the campaign lately, where you've seen Scott Walker claiming that he's leading the nation and the Democrats have been against it. And ironically, he's kind of tied up with Obama there, and that they both do well if job figures improve.
Because Barack Obama is talking about an increase in jobs in Wisconsin as well, to show that his national policies are working at the same time as Scott Walker is claiming job creation. What is the truth then, as far as you're concerned, Robert Kraig? One, on job creation as a result of Scott Walker's policies, but two, on the doom and gloom scenarios for teachers and others not having come to pass?
Well, Alex is right about the numbers being politicized. The standard numbers that most states use show Walker as having, Wisconsin under Walker being 50 out of 50 in job creation. Walker introduced additional numbers, which he brought out early. There were census numbers that aren't released by the federal government until the end of June. They actually, and he tried to make it look like it was progress, they're actually put Wisconsin bottom in the Midwest. So both sets of numbers are bad. And Walker had run promising 250,000 jobs, as you had pointed out, done $2.2 billion in corporate tax cuts with no strings attached, really, and it did not work. Now, as far as working on the cuts, when you take, over $1 billion out of education, out of local government, it's going to have a big impact. We've already seen increases in class size, but one thing you need to understand is that it's a 2-year budget, and it's the second year of the budget, which starts this July 1st, where the biggest impact occurs. It was cushioned somewhat, which helped Walker in this election, by the stimulus package, what was left over from Obama's stimulus, and also by a whole lot of early retirements, which they're not going to get in future years. It's like 4 or 5 years of retirements occurred all at once because public employees were so alarmed by what was going on. So it's already had a negative impact, but we think it's going to be even worse moving forward. But of course, Governor Walker's been reelected and he cannot be recalled again.
Brendan Steinhauser?
I don't think the voters agree with that. And the numbers that I've seen are that 30,000 jobs have been created since Walker took office. Unemployment was below 7%. So, but again, I think it goes back to our first principles that whether it's President Obama or whether it's Governor Walker, they don't create private sector jobs. And the private sector creates private sector jobs. What politicians can do is get the budgets under control, keeps taxes low, regulations low, so that the private sector can work.
Okay, so now moving ahead then, I mean, clearly that is the ideological framework of Scott Walker. Alex Seitz-Wald, moving ahead, does this embolden other governors to put that framework into practice, or does it just show how much trouble it is? Because certainly in Ohio, collective bargaining policy like this failed. The governors in Florida, even in Virginia, are having trouble perhaps in pushing similar policies through. I mean, where does this leave them?
Yeah, I think it depends on which kind of governor you're talking about. And that's certainly the message from the Democrats, is they're saying no governor in his right mind would want to go down this route because they saw what happened to Scott Walker. No one wants to be recalled. On the other hand, I think Walker is going to emerge from this personally much stronger, much more popular on the national stage than he was before. He's going to be canonized as a union slayer on the right. And if you have a young, ambitious governor looking to make a name for themselves nationally somewhere else, I think they could see this as a model and pursue that in their own personal self-term interest, even if it puts the interests of the state by the wayside.
Robert, Kraig, I mean, what about the implications for November? You, I think, already talked about the number of those who voted for Walker, but actually were for Obama. And an overwhelming number, 53% to 42% supported Barack Obama in the exit polls. 44% preferred Obama on the economy to Romney. I mean, what does all this mean? How does this all compute?
Well, it's a real good question. It's partly why Obama stayed out of the state, I think, which disappointed us who are trying to recall Scott Walker. And so the exit polls bear that strategy out. It's a short-term strategy that I think damages the Democratic Party long-term, but it may help President Obama be reelected. I think there's some negative impact on his reelection just because of momentum in the state of Wisconsin, but November is a long way away. And so the exit polls show it's entirely plausible for a number of Walker voters to be Obama supporters and for both men to win reelection this year.
Well, I mean, it has to be said,
I think it's a battleground state and it'll be close.
Barack Obama was never a great fan of teachers' unions anyway. I mean, his education secretary doesn't seem to be a great fan of them. I mean, do you think that comes into it at all?
It's a good point, but I don't think he's going to run that way. I don't think he's going to run in Wisconsin as being opposed to teachers' unions. But you're right. He has some sympathy in that direction. He's more of a third way kind of candidate, not a movement candidate. Scott Walker's a movement right-wing candidate. Alex
Seitz-Wald, I mean, that's the other point that progressives are perhaps taking from this with some bitterness. Once again, the Democratic Party, Barack Obama in particular, has shown that he's unable to support a progressive agenda when he's asked to. Perhaps indeed his corporate backers have more in common with those supporting Scott Walker than those supporting the teachers' unions and others. Where does that leave that idea that the progressives, the unions, the Occupy Wall Street folks, they can't rely on the Democrat Party for this? There isn't enough of a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think that's a really important question about what's going on. And you're going to see finger pointing with local union leaders and the national Democrats and the and the Obama campaign. But I don't think they should have to rely on it. The party is a party. It's not a movement, and the movement should exist outside the party. That's why you have the success of people on the right with the Tea Party movement, and they've been tremendously successful, no matter which side of the aisle you come from, in holding the party true to its values. And we just haven't seen that on the left. The Occupy movement wasn't really able to be strong enough in that direction. So I think here is a perfect example. Obama, in the short term, in his narrow interest, in his reelection interest, I think comes out okay, not great, slightly damaged. Jim Messina, the campaign manager, put out a video this week in which they put Wisconsin in the toss-up column. It had previously been a safe bet for Obama, and Mitt Romney is going to inherit this very robust infrastructure that Scott Walker built up in the state. He's just going to come in. This was a state where he probably wouldn't have spent much money anyway, and now he's going to have this all waiting for him. On the other hand, the exit polls show that Obama would have won last night, and he kept his distance, so he's not going to have the tarnish of the loss on him. So he'll be fine. But the broader left, the unions, are certainly hurt.
Actually, I'll return to Robert Kraig there, because, I mean, you do represent the unions, after all. I mean, what kind of discussion is going on? Who is this Barack Obama? Who is this Democrat Party? Can you rely on them?
It's Sophie's choice, right? Because you have a right wing that wants to destroy people's rights to have unions, and then you have a National Democratic Party that wants union support but doesn't want to put its neck out too far to defend unions. They don't have an alternative theory as to how to build a broad-based middle class. That's how we did it in the 20th century. So I think Alex is absolutely right. Our movement, and that's what we want to continue here in Wisconsin, needs to put pressure on the Democrats the way the Tea Party has done that with the Republican Party. We don't have the money behind behind us the Tea Party had, but that's the only real avenue there is in order to change this and to change our economic policy in this country and to create more opportunity and security for most Americans.
So Brendan Steinhauser, then in conclusion, I mean, is this going to be the argument moving forward in November? It's sort of an economic narrative that does seem to be getting traction. You're not going to get higher wages from corporations. Corporations don't want to pay you higher wages, so pressure the government to lower taxes, no matter what the consequences are. I mean, that seems to be it in a nutshell.
Well, first of all, it's laughable that the unions don't have money, and they've been in the top, out of the top 5 spenders on elections in the last decades, the unions are probably 3 out of the top 10, or 3 out of the top 5 even. So they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to get involved in elections. That's just completely absurd. In terms of the clash, the vision for 2012, it is about the simple principle that Americans get. The center gets this. The independents get this. You can't spend more money you can't spend more money than you take in, and that's the key question going forward in 2012.
All right, Brendan Steinhauser, thank you very much. Alex Seitz-Wald, thank you. Robert Kraig, thank you very much too. That's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net.